US. We're also working with David Protas's Chicago Innocence Project, doing work there. So I've incorporated some of that into my research, and it's been a very rewarding experience. So I wanted to thank, of course, Dr. Barrett for introducing us and for being able to do that sort of work. So what I'm going to be presenting on, and the research I've done, is on the assistance of counsel, specifically of defense, in criminal cases across the US and the UK. And I framed my research as trying to ensure a competent defense to prevent wrongful convictions across the United States and the United Kingdom. So, of course, the Sixth Amendment to the Constitution says that in all criminal prosecutions, the accused shall have the assistance of counsel for his defense, but the Supreme Court has never actually defined what constitutes the assistance of counsel. They've determined what counsel is, but not whether things can be determined to have been assisting them or not assisting them. And you can't currently appeal based on poor assistance or poor counsel. So my main issue is this inequity between defense and prosecution, which is not, in fact, unique to the US or even necessarily a consequence of the adversarial system. So this is a slide of Joe Pesci from the classic film, My Cousin Vinny. And I have this up here because it refers to the sort of model of justice we have in the United States that says that whatever can go wrong in a case, if you have a really good lawyer at your side, things can turn around. And there's a truth in that in which, especially in the United States, a lot of causes of wrongful conviction that you'll hear about today, whether it's profiling or evidence mishandling, just in general, railroading of a person can be stemmed with a good defense lawyer. But the flip side of this, and the problem with this, is that there's sort of a buyer beware system of justice, where if you don't have a good lawyer, the answer to you is tough luck. You should have had a better one. But of course, with the indigent accused, who are often and totally slanted towards like wrongful convictions, of course, the poor minorities, they tend to be much more wrongfully accused and then convicted than other groups. They normally have access to public defense, and they don't get to choose their lawyer at all. So I have this slide to comment on the idea that the public is not preferable, the government provided. And when we have this pay justice system where the free market naturally propels the best and brightest lawyers towards lucrative careers, there's obviously the inverse effect where the worst lawyers are pushed towards the bottom and a guaranteed paycheck, often in the form of being a public attorney. On the other side, though, all criminal prosecutors are public. So there is this inequity there between allowing this spectrum of quality and of cost to defense, but not to prosecution. Unfortunately, the good and the pure of heart is not a reliable recruitment pool. We can't just rely naturally on lawyers who want to do good, to be willing to take a pay cut and to work just for the good of the community, especially when public defenders, specifically in Chicago, make about a third of what a starting partner in a private law firm would. There's also a problem of perception versus reality with defense, where they're constantly asked, and I actually heard this from a public defender in Chicago, that they're constantly asked, why would you defend the bad people in the world? We have this classic prosecutorial bias where people are guilty until proven innocent, and we have the belief that if someone's put on a stand, they must have done something to get there. The ideal of the adversarial system that two masters of the law will do battle, and that truth is found sort of among the rubble. But in the reality, the odds are stacked against the defendant, and the prosecutor has this benefit of cooperation with the police and the media, along with this, like I said, assumption of guilt. So the research question is, how can we put prosecutors and defenders on equal footing? In the UK, the sort of pseudo-inquisitorial system, and I'll get to why I say that, leaves the defendant uninvolved in his own case. And often the lawyers are the barristers are so close to each other on both the investigative and the defense side that there's not a impetus, or there's not a reason for attorneys or barristers to get really involved in the details. In fact, they're forbidden from doing their own investigations in the UK. They can only work with what's put on the table by the investigators. And that can mean the structure of trials has a result of making results seem effectively preordained, and there's not surprises or changes of heart during trials. And people I talk to in the UK, experts actually, expressed a desire to move towards an adversarial system, a more adversarial system, because of that freedom to change what a trial may be going through by using new evidence or good witnesses or even just good lawyering. The reason why I say that the UK doesn't have a truly inquisitorial system is because fundamentally, if you have a person on the stand or on in the court who is the quote-unquote defendant, that frames the case around them, not what the crime was. So even if you have the idea of you're just looking for the truth, there's a person up there and you still have to prove whether they're innocent or guilty. One thing the UK system does well is that it recognizes that different cases require different types of attention. The US doesn't do that very well. You shouldn't lose sight of the accused, but more severe crimes do require severe attention, especially when the case of wrongful convictions in those cases can result in heavy sentences for people who didn't even commit their crime. What I'm proposing is that money should be allocated to public defense attorneys based on the severity of the crime, not just these standard hourly in-court, out-of-court rates we have. Right now, public defenders fear murder trials or capital cases because they require a lot of time investment and a lot of expertise, but not a lot of prestige or sort of the attention that prosecutors get. Prosecutors love criminal cases or capital cases, but defense attorneys try to avoid them. So the ideal is to get defense attorneys paid better and not just more. I had called previously for mandatory caseloads, but that's not it's important, but not sufficient to cover the whole thing. And finally, so there's an issue of responsibility and taking responsibility for your case. In the US, lawyers are immune from prosecution. I'm sure most people know that. And in the UK, the Criminal Cases Review Commission can't call for a retrial with the same evidence, so they can't say we need a do-over because the case wasn't conducted in the proper way. It can only be because of evidence being revealed. So a better review commission in both cases would have non-practicing legal experts, like some that we might have in the room today, grade the lawyer's use of the evidence in the law and make that data public, both for prosecutors being presented to voters and for defense to the accused. So I think I'll wrap it up there. Thank you.
Could you use your microphone?
Oh, sure. In Cook County in particular, if I were ever accused of a crime, I would take the public defender. Public defender positions are very highly sought after in a large segment of the legal community, and I think one of the greatest impediments to a public defender doing their job as effectively as they could is the high caseload, rather than their talent or lack thereof.
Oh, certainly. I don't believe that a public defender is naturally less of a lawyer than a private defender. It's just when you have that spectrum, there will be some lawyers and some good lawyers who won't be able to serve the indigent just because there's a natural inclination to do your best for the money you can get, and that's because it's a free enterprise system. And also, obviously, the standards are national. So, because of Chicago's special circumstances, we have very good public defenders in the city. But we also have incredibly, I don't want to use the word vicious, but vicious prosecutors. And it's unique to Chicago in those conditions. But nationally, we have a lot of small jurisdictions that have very poor public defense units.
Alex, I'll stop you there and say fantastic job, and I think for purposes of time, maybe, I know that we all would say fantastic work, and maybe if we could continue on with the presentations. But thank you very much. Well done. Who would like to go? Okay, great.
So I was inspired after the Innocence Gallery at the Gage Gallery. I was inspired by Steve Risen's talk to talk about how police prosecution can kind of influence wrongful convictions through eliciting false confessions. And so I focus primarily on confessions and how they're sought after in interrogation rooms. And so my confession assumptions are that there's a potential for confessions to be shaped and coerced. Many of the public eye would probably disagree with this, but until we have evidence like Elizabeth Loft is talking about, memories and how people can be coerced into different kinds of events that probably never happened or they blacked out or something like that. It can be a very powerful form of evidence. And in some cases, it can be the most powerful form of evidence. It has a large determinant on many cases because if the jury doesn't know exactly what happened in the interrogation room and how the methods were applied on eliciting this confession, they'll just say, well, if the guy said he did it, then he did it. He wouldn't say otherwise to protect his innocence. And so interrogation becomes a kind of out-of-court prosecution in that the prosecution, largely siding with the police, will say that it's in their best interest to confess, even though they have no defense or attorney telling them exactly if this is like a very good, if it's a good thing to say that they should confess or they should keep silence. And so, looking at the UK spectrum, we see that because of the implementation of audio recording, and in all cases, pretty much all cases, and video recording in specific circumstances, high-profile cases, murders, rapes, so forth, there is a larger reliance as a consequence on more empirical evidence than just merely what somebody subjectively said in an interrogation. And also, prosecutors and police cannot simply say and shape exactly what happened in an interrogation room because they're authority figures and jury would trust them usually on a normal basis in court. And so there's a less politically fueled prosecutorial system also which comes into the fray where prosecutors typically in the US will be more concerned about securing convictions and being, quote, hard on crime. And they have that kind of hard on crime, soft on crime dichotomy that exists here because they're looking for re-elections and that's what's allegedly in the public interest in the US. And so in the UK, they're employed by the state of the Crown Prosecutorial Service. And so they're less prone, they don't have re-elections, they're less prone to this kind of political bias towards securing convictions. They're more seeking whatever the truth may be. And they also have kind of a collegiate relationship with defenders and defendants also. So it becomes less about this kind of prosecutorial game of securing convictions and more about seeking the truth. And also, because interrogators do not rely on the absence of, rely on read technique, which is basically, it's making assumptions about nonverbal cues and factors such as that to deduce whether they're guilty or not. And because these wrongful cases in the UK, especially in the 1970s, the Guildford 4, Birmingham 6, and so forth, in 1974 and 1975, it leads to tangible lawmaking, namely, let's see here. It set up the Police and Criminal Evidence Act, which is like the hugest act in 1984 that's pretty much the equivalent to our Miranda rights here. It established the Crown Prosecution Service in 1986, and